Hi guys. So I have actually been playing a lot of Shadow the past 2 weeks. I feel like I pretty much played it exclusively and didn't play any healing whatsoever. So I mentioned in my last video that I was feeling very not confident with my Shadow. And anytime I played the spec, I felt like I would be a liability, handicap, just like not being as comfortable as everybody else. But I have been feeling much better about the damage that I'm outputting, how I'm using my cooldowns, and just it feels more natural for me now. So I randomly joined this 20 HOA pug yesterday. And normally, when you expect to join pugs, I don't expect very much. I phrased that so poorly. I'm sorry. I was trying to think of a way to not use the word expect, but I couldn't think of another word. Anyways, yeah, I did not also realize that this group was a guild. Like they were all four guildies. I didn't realize that at all. But something I'm starting to realize a bit more about Shadow, unfortunately, is that I'm probably not Searing Nightmaring enough. So for this run, I went Searing Nightmare, I went Shadow Crash, and I went Mindbender, I believe. Yes, I did. So the main reason for that is because it is not Tyrannical Week. And having Mindbender makes it a little bit nicer for trash because I don't have to stand there and channel for the full duration. But rather, when I use Mindbender, it's kind of like passive insanity regeneration that I just use it and can spend my globals on other things. But yeah, it is kind of disappointing to me how we're just spamming Searing Nightmare because I don't enjoy that playstyle whatsoever. I think that's why you'll see me using Vampiric Touch a lot for some of these like large packs because I'm so used to using both of my dots on everything and then trying to maintain it and just the Auspicious Spirits playstyle is kind of what I prefer, but unfortunately, I don't think it does as much damage. So, for example, I know I'm not talking about this run at all right now. I promise I'll get to it. But yesterday, I think it was yesterday, I did a Mists. And for Mists lately, I have been using Misery. And I like these dungeons that have smaller pulls in order to let me use Misery. But the thing is, I'm starting to think that for Mists, I should still be using Searing Nightmare because the pools aren't that small. It's like 4 to 5. And the thing is, I just kind of get the feeling that Searing Nightmare overall does more damage outside of our cooldowns, right? So I'm pretty confident that Psychic Link or Auspicious Spirits does a lot of damage when we have our cooldowns up because we're sending out so many ghosts. But outside of that window, I kind of feel like I'm doing nothing. And that really sucks compared to when you're using Searing. The damage from that is just pretty good. So, anyways, let's talk about this run. Something I just really wanted to note that I've been focusing a lot more on is trying to um, use my spells a little bit more carefully. So before in the past, I feel like I would just kind of like throw shit out, especially when it came to AoE. But I want to try to use Shadow Crash after I use Void Eruption because you get the spell damage bonus off of that. And small things like that matter. When I was just starting to play Shadow a lot more, I was just kind of throwing my spells whatsoever and not focusing on stuff like that. So another thing also that I also try to do is if I'm over 45 insanity, I try to mind flay to get over the 50 mark, place my devouring plague, and then I mind blast. I'm not entirely sure if that's correct, but my reasoning for that is because I'm using Talbadar's stratagem, the legendary, which makes your mind blast hit much harder if you have all three dots up. And I know ideally you want to use Mind Blast off cooldown, but I just feel like if you save it for when you have Devouring Plague up, then that's probably what you should aim to do. I mean, that's just my logic. Um, Another thing I did want to mention in regards to this dungeon specifically, on the first pull and the second pull, there's a Houndmaster, right? And later on, there'll be more Houndmasters, but they tend to do a rapid fire. So whenever it comes to that, I always try to fear it or stun it because sometimes, depending on where they end up channeling that spell, it can do a lot of damage. And also, it's just inconvenient sometimes. So obviously, you can stand out of it, but if they're actually spreading it in a cone area, which makes it very difficult for you to avoid it, it's always best to just interrupt it. So that's what I tried to do on the first pull, but by now we're not even watching that anymore, so people probably don't remember it anymore. But these early pulls are pretty much all about spamming searing. So something that I can definitely do that I need to do is go back and look at what Warcraft priests recommend in terms of when you like they have a conditional, right, when it comes to Searing Nightmare. So for 3 targets, do this, but keep your rotation of including Mind Blast in. For 6 or more, they say like you can still use Void Bolt if you have Hungering Void talented, and then if you have 7+ targets, or like I I just kind of like made that up out of memory. There's probably a lot wrong with what I just said, but basically, those conditionals, I need to know them well. And right now, I don't. Sometimes I probably choose to randomly throw out a VT in there if I feel like I have the time for the mob to live and the global to spare, something like that. But definitely for these thrashes, try to outrange it. But I will say that for us Shadow Priests, outranging it can be a little annoying because I feel like it is our absolute max range. And sometimes, like dancing around and finding it can be very annoying. Um, I might be like one of the few people that actually regularly backpedals. I actually love backpedaling. So right now, like you can see me inching backwards, backpedaling, just trying to find that range where I stop taking damage from Thrash. But also another thing that I did not manage to do very well during that pull was toss and interrupt, right? So like I say all the time, make sure you interrupt spells. And then for the second half of Pride, I always try to use BE. Here, I'll have to see, but holding PI for another full minute feels kind of bad, so I'm not really sure if I end up doing that. That's something that I still need to figure out a bit more because it definitely feels weird holding PI if I desync my cooldowns a little bit. And here it looked like it was getting a little bit rough. But actually, that's the problem that I have. I don't play often with other classes and healers, so I don't really know what their strengths are or like how well they're able to keep you up, like when to expect those big heals and stuff like that. So here I ended up tossing a silence onto the obliterator right away, just so he wouldn't cast and he would group up much easier. So here, oh yes, okay. I'm guessing my Void Eruption just came off cooldown, so the traditional spamming Searing Nightmare play begin. Definitely use those Mind Blast Dark Thoughts procs if you don't have the insanity for your spamming Searing Nightmare. And also another thing that I noticed that I'm actually quite happy about is they hardcore, here I'm gonna stun, yes, I stunned the rapid fire. They nerfed the range of shade smacks. So before, these spiteful shades would hit you from quite far away. Now they are very weak. in my opinion. Now they're pretty much just an annoyance. They waste your time because they keep you in combat and prevent your healer from drinking. That part I really, really dislike because when you have Spiteful plus Grievous and the healer is like desperately in need of mana, it's just like makes me really unhappy that they would design such a stupid fucking affix like Grievous. But yeah, I just definitely find it very, very different. And sometimes I'm just trying to figure out like what they changed it to exactly because there have been so many times that the shade is right next to me, but he doesn't hit me. So I feel like they walk up to you and then they like spend like perhaps 1 second being in melee range getting ready to hit you, and then if you move out slightly they just need to spend that additional time moving a little bit closer because yeah, there have been so many times I expect them to hit me and they just don't. So definitely when it comes to shades though, use your fear for that. Fear is so good for shades as long as people don't break it. But also what I love about fear before they nerf the range, that is that fear hits fairly far. So before I was able to fear the shades before they were able to hit me when they had the increased range for smacking. But now since they're nerfed, it's even better. Oh god, I got hit by that thing. So I guess another good thing, well, Void Torrent kind of serves the same purpose on the prize, but I guess it just always feels like I should have Mindbender for these prize. And as a class that doesn't usually use their cooldowns on Pride, although I will say that maybe I should not fixate so much on that narrative that I'm not somebody that uses cooldowns on Pride whatsoever, because there will always be times where if the healer is struggling or you just had a really, really rough pull, just use your fucking cooldowns just to make this easier and faster on your healer, because as the keys go up and if I manage to do higher keys, those are things that I will need to expect. But fuck, I actually had something I wanted to mention about prides that I completely forgot about. Oh, so people are gonna hate me for this because people were hating on it in older videos that I've been putting out of Shadow. But yes, I'm still not using Boon like at all. And I'll admit I'm trying to figure it out, but sometimes it's so awkward for Shadow to use. And yeah, there is actually times where I've tried to use it for AoE when I don't have Void Eruption. So for example, the spectral soul ghosts in theater, the ones that chain and channel on you, and they're actually a pretty tough pack to do successfully just because of how much you need to interrupt them and how much damage they can do to a single person on a full chain. So that pack I have been starting to try to use Boon, mainly because I guess if I don't have Void Eruption in that dungeon, I have been getting Misery because the packs are relatively small. But I'm rethinking that as well because for the ghosts, my AoE is not the greatest when I don't have Void Eruption, and I'm still playing around with things. But yeah, so on that pack, I have tried to use Boon a little bit more. Oh yes, that's another thing I actually just thought of. I have thought about using Boon a little bit on Prides as well as Shadow for the second half, of course, because I'll have to see what the damage is like if I can filter them in. So let me see. If I don't have any Mind Blast to cast and my Ascended Blast is also on cooldown, then I will probably throw in the Ascended AoE cast in between my rotation. So I do want to try that out a little bit more. I don't think I did that at all in this dungeon, but yeah, I am trying to figure out how to better fit it into my rotation. I know you're supposed to use it when you Void Eruption, and you could probably use it on openers for a boss, but for your boss, for a boss. But I guess I feel like we have so many instants to cast when we have our cooldowns with PI and heroism. Like I'm always cycling between Mind Blast, DP, Void Bolt, and there's so much insanity generation during that that actually I have noticed that if I'm trying to be even the tiniest bit conservative with casting Devouring Plague during heroism, I'm actually capping myself out way too much. So I'm gonna have to revert that a little bit. I do have a very conservative playstyle. I've always been that way because I focus a lot on being as efficient as possible. So, I would rather cast DP when I have, say, 90 insanity compared to like 78, but because of I do use Ascendant Blast here. Very interesting. But I do wonder what that final heal will look like. I need to watch this because oh shit, I totally just missed it. But it looked like a pretty oh yes, and these balls. That's another thing, yes, that I can do better. I don't know what it is about what I'm looking at when I play sometimes, but yeah. When I'm watching it over now, it looks very obvious, right? That the fucking ball was right there. What the fuck? Okay, so that right now, I have sometimes been having perhaps some queuing issues. Maybe I'm mashing way too hard and it's not registering. So my DP fell off and I didn't recast it for like 3 globals when I had the insanity for it. But oh, also another thing that I've been noticing, I'm thinking it must be a what do you call it? Internal cooldown issue. So we have a conduit, right? Where there's a chance for your Void Bolt to become available anytime, right? So inside Void Eruption, inside Void form or outside of Void form, your Void Bolt can just randomly reset, allowing you to recast it, right? So there's times where that procs for me and I'm spamming pressing that button and the fucking Void Bolt is not going off. So if anyone could tell me why that's happening, I would love to hear it. The thing is, there are times where that proc goes off and my weak aura shows a little cooldown, like 2 seconds before I can cast it again. So I'm like, okay, there must be a little GCD involved. But there's some times where I don't see that and it's just not letting me use it. So obviously that drives me crazy because I'm wasting so much time trying to press this fucking spell that's not going off. And I don't know what's causing it. So I would like to know and better understand. But I do actually, for this dungeon, I do prefer skipping that entire second section because I just feel like clearing majority in the first area, I don't know. I like that a lot. It works out pretty well for me. All right, so for the second boss, I will tell you guys that this boss is very triggering for me because there's a lot of classes and players that play. Okay, let me rephrase that. There's a lot of players that play classes with decurse that don't know how to decurse on this boss. And I'm not even saying that they don't know how to decurse. I'm saying they don't know how to choose the right person to decurse. And perhaps that is something that you understand better playing a healer because when I approach this boss, my mentality is I want to avoid the hardest mechanics on this boss. And what is the hardest mechanic? This leap damage because it does so much. Like, first off, this guy didn't even clear the gargoyles on the ground. I don't fucking understand why. But I was just like, whatever, it's a bug. They're just doing whatever the fuck they want. So I'll try to speak faster before this boss dies. But quick thing for Shadow. I try not to pop my cooldowns on this boss until the first round of fucking gargoyles spawn. That way I can Void Eruption, Shadow Crash, and then Searing Nightmare, and it should clear out most of them. But anyways, so what I'm talking about for Leap, so right before the circle, no, right after the circle around your character fades away, you are able to leave the area and avoid his jump damage. And his jump damage outside of these imps casting and like dealing a fair amount of damage, that, in my opinion, is the main thing that wipes groups on this boss, taking that damage. So you see right now, I gripped the druid out. Yes, the druid is the tank, but if you can ever avoid that damage, there is absolutely no fucking reason why you should not avoid it. So let me go over this. In this party, the rogue can get out, the mage can get out, I can't get out. So if it's ever on me, if I'm getting jumped on, the healer should just be dispelling himself and, you know, healing me, right? And I can have disperse for if it's on me. So that will be very good. But say there's no shaman in this group and we only had a mage. So the mage would need to know these conditionals for when it's best to dispel certain people. Mages can blink out, rogues can hook out, balanced druids can always get out with wild charge. Hunters can disengage out, but I've never fucking seen a hunter do that because these are just things that I feel like a lot of players don't even bother thinking about. They don't think about utilizing utility to avoid damage. They just kind of like, I don't know. These are just things that I'm brainstorming because I'm not gonna lie. There's so many groups that fail on this boss from like 16s, 17s to like 20s that we've been trying to do. We would get people that have done plenty of 20s on time and they still don't understand how to properly decurse on this boss. And I honestly don't think it's that difficult. It just requires a little bit of thinking of what utility each class has for you to know if they get chosen, who is it best to dispel, the healer or the class and the person in itself to allow them to escape the jump themselves. So maybe people often forget that priests have leap of faith, but I always try to tell people if somebody is chosen that does not have an escape, please decurse me, the healer, so I can grip them out. Otherwise, if it's a mage or any of the classes that I mentioned, dispel them so they can escape it. As a healer, I don't always need to get the decurse. I would rather they totally avoid the damage than me to be decursed and healing through that damage because that damage is no joke. It's very hard hitting initially, and then the dot ticks afterwards come very fast. So if they're at like 20% health right after the jump and you don't have a heal lined up for them very, very fast, they will probably die from the dot right afterwards. So anyways, now that I'm done ranting about that, this pull was actually the lifesaver of this dungeon because I don't think I've done this pull before where we're pulling the 4 into the boss. And it's definitely not a bad idea because this boss is a joke. But I guess I just always get nervous and I feel bad. It's so weird to say that. I feel bad for the healer because I play heals. I'm just like, man, we're making it maybe kind of tough on him because we're doing boss plus fortified trash. Something that I am a little bit confused about myself is why I did not vampiric touch these 4 trash mobs. I just instead decided to spam Searing Nightmare. Maybe that's okay. I don't know, but I do feel like they lived long enough to justify casting a VT on each of them, especially because I go into void form and I'd be extending the dots. But anyways, this boss is definitely very easy. But another thing that I absolutely hate about this boss is the platform is very awkward. So for my Shadow Crash, I use a macro where I cast it on the cursor, so I don't need to click the green circle before it casts. It's like quick cast, and I love using quick cast. So whenever I try to use it on this boss, depending on where I am and the angle of my camera, it can be difficult for me to use it. Like I could press it and it won't go off. That's why you'll see me whenever I use Shadow Crash, I'll aim my camera maybe downwards a little bit or maybe to the side. I don't know. We'll see. It's coming up in 3 seconds. But okay. I think if I'm on the side of the wall, so basically, normally when you start this boss where the mage is standing, that's where I tend to stand, right? Because that's where you're coming from originally. I would say usually from that angle, I have a lot of issues using Shadow Crash, but apparently from this side, I'm not having as many issues whatsoever. Um, Something else that I have been thinking a lot about is Dark Thoughts. So I know that when you get that proc, ideally you want to be using it during Mind Flay because you can cast it while you're channeling, right? That's super good. There's no reason not to do that. I think sometimes I don't know if it's just laziness or what, where I use the proc without channeling Mind Flay, but just know that I'm obviously aware that it's better to do so. There's just times that I don't. I do think though, let me think. So during our cooldowns on boss pulls with heroism, I think that is perhaps the one time where it's okay not to do that. And my reasoning for that is because, like I mentioned before, we have so much haste, we have so much insanity generation, and also I want to get as many Mind Blast casts off, right? From my legendary. So if you take that extra global to cast Mind Flay first and then cast your Mind Blast, I just feel like there's so many other globals you could be using during that rotation. Like there's Mind Blast, there's Void Bolt, there's DP, and we cycle through those so quickly that taking that extra global to cast Mind Flay just to get the Dark Thoughts cast during the channel might not be worth it, right? Because all of the other spells that we could be casting, those deal a ton of damage during our rotation. So that's my explanation for that. But I wanted to comment on this right here. I died earlier. So I actually don't think I have ever been fixated on by 5 of them before. So what happened was I died, I got battle res, and then once I came up, 5 of them fixated on me, and I got super low and I managed to disperse it. But um, I guess I have never taken these little guys seriously. I don't know why. I know it's fortified, but I was really, really surprised about that. Actually, one thing that I am 90% sure I was focusing on in this room is not standing in that red shit on the ground, because that is one of the things that I have been dying to as Shadow. That is really embarrassing for me. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't standing in that shit, but I must have not fully realized that, like, when those guys fixate on you, it's a lot of damage. So I could have used my disperse, obviously, before dying previously, but maybe it turned out to be okay because I had it for after battle res, but that's not really a good argument, right? Scenarios change if you choose a different choice. Here, I wonder if oh, nope, I used it right there. VE. Because at first I was thinking, oh, it would be nice to save VE for the boss, but it is 2 minutes. So it'll be up in the middle of the boss, and um, it should be just fine. Whenever it comes to halls, I actually don't have a very good uh, understanding, or just, I don't know the fucking word. I'm bad at knowing what the timing is like. So during this run, I couldn't tell if we were still on par with timing the dungeon. But also, what I like to make sure of before I open up on this boss is making sure that my Mind Blast is on cooldown before I pop my Void Eruption, because Void Eruption will always refresh Mind Blast to 2 stacks. So ideally, you don't want to have a charge sitting there before you use it. And also another thing, people have told me, and I'm sure it might be true, that when he's about to throw these statues at you, they turn before they get thrown, so you know what direction they're going in. But I also get the feeling that you can't easily tell if you're at a distance. Because there's times where I would look at it, see that it turned, and then I would be like, oh, it's not coming towards me. But it does end up coming towards me. So instead of taking that risk, I think I don't mind moving while it's about to fly. Because the thing is, if you're moving when it's about to go out, there is like a 0% chance of you getting hit by it. Because it's going to register where you were right before it's about to fly. And if you're moving, there's just no way it's going to hit you. So anytime it's about to go off, I just make sure I'm moving in any sort of fucking direction and avoid that damage, because obviously at these hierarchies, it probably will one-shot you. Something I did notice on the first, was it the first one? Yes, it was the first one, I think. So I kind of get the feeling if I did not off heal the first channel of Ritual of Woes, I might have died, because I feel like towards the end I was pretty low and I casted maybe 2 to 3 Shadow Mends on myself. I mean, so that's definitely not a bad thing. But yeah, anyways, that is the whole run. I am also very surprised that I did 7.3k overall. So I have actually been struggling to get over 6k damage overall. I feel like it's very inconsistent for me to get that damage usually. And I honestly still have no fucking idea how I did 7.3k overall. Some things that I was thinking about for this dungeon were the mini boss right before this boss, this last one. So I am wondering if the minions that he drains from are always the same in terms of the ordering that he does. So when you first go through the mirror, what I noticed during this run is he drained the ones towards the back, the 2 quadrants next to him first, and then those little guys ran over to us while we were AoEing the minions in the front that were still neutral. So my understanding of that area, and I believe it's correct, but people can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you want to kill the neutrals before he drains from them, right? Because when he drains from them, he turns them into those manifestations that become hostile, aggro, whatever. And then they also heal to full. And he also heals from them. So I just feel like maybe that was a good circumstance of events, because all of those little guys ran over, and then I was able to Searing Nightmare those at the same time as the neutrals that were still alive on the side. But the thing is, in the past, what I would do was I would run in and I would Searing Nightmare like each quadrant just to make sure I got my Shadow Wear Pain dot on them. And that's kind of like a padding mentality, right? That's kind of stupid to do. Like, it's better to focus down neutrals at a time just to ensure that they're dead, because that would actually contribute to making it faster and preventing him from healing compared to just padding your DPS, right? So I don't know, surprised. And yeah, thank you for watching the video, and excited, I guess, that I got a 20 on Shadow, because I have been feeling like I'm still pulled in 2 different directions, but I think I am comfortable now in wanting to play both specs for high keys and not feeling like a handicap, especially because I do have a lot of people telling me that they enjoy when I heal, because I do it well, and I I guess I communicate well, and there's just times when you play with other healers and you feel like a little bit scared for your health more often, or you don't feel like you trust your healer as often. And I've definitely felt that plenty of times when I play Shadow. It's a big, big difference when you feel confident in knowing they can keep you up, or they will ask you to use cooldowns at certain areas and you just trust their call. So all of that stuff matters. And I have played some disc this week, even though I prefer not to, because Grievous is pretty terrible and unenjoyable and all the negative things you can say about it. But at times, I have realized it's not so bad. It's just annoying, really. So, yeah. Thank you for watching.